Hey guys, so this is the fourth and almost final video for this assignment. There is going to be one short video after this that shows you how to make a build of your game. That is a requirement for this submission for Assignment 5, and I want to have it as a separate video so you can reference it anytime you may need it. But in this video, we are going to do our main menu and game over screen. So we're going to create two new canvases, add some new UI elements to them, and we're going to be using an interactable UI element. In this case, we're going to be using a button. Now there's a bunch of them as part of the canvas system. The button is probably the most common one. And I'm also going to use the opportunity to talk to you about the idea of events and event listeners. All of the interactable UI elements in Unity, as well as a host of other things in Unity, use this idea of events, where you create an event in one class and on one object, and then you subscribe to that event with listeners, so that when that original event triggers, any listener that's subscribed to that event will also trigger. It's used pretty heavily in Unity, and it's super, once you create your own Unity events, it's super useful, especially when you're creating tools for designers that don't want to go into your code and hook something up, right? You can actually give them a spot in Unity to hook up, to add a listener to your event from code. So we're going to look at that just as an introduction to it, because certainly we'll be talking about it more in your courses in the next couple of years. So anyway, and of course we're going to put the finishing touches on, add our game over, add our main menu, and the whole game will be playable by the end of this video. Okay, so let's jump into Unity and just talk about it. Okay, so last time we left off, we were setting up, well, we finished setting up our HUD except for one thing, which is the player lives, which we're going to fix right here at the beginning. So we have a timer in the middle, score on the right-hand side here, which you can see updates when I get kills. And we have lives on the left-hand side. But they're actually not working right now, which is obviously going to prevent us from getting a game over screen. Now, I had forgotten to do something. I thought that maybe we would have to hook up some more here, but really all we have to do to get that to work, that I forgot about, is just to go to the main player. And first of all, you have to make sure that your main player is not invincible, but he wouldn't even be able to die if he was, so that should not be a problem. But we do need to turn off infinite lives, obviously. Now you can choose how many lives your player has. Obviously 4 is going to be the maximum here. I'm just going to leave mine at 3. Well, I guess I could set it to 4 since we set up 4 icons. And as long as you have that change, infinite lives turned off, and you have more than 0 lives as the num starting lives value here, it should work. So we should have all of our HUD elements updating properly. And of course, that will allow us to actually get a game over, right? If I let myself get killed here, lose all my lives, we should actually get a little game over sound, and that's where we're going to have our game over screen appear, obviously. All right, so the game freezes. We get a little sound effect. I'm not sure if I actually have sound turned on for you guys, but it doesn't matter for this video. And that's where our game over screen will go, and we'll ask the player, hey, do you want to play again, or do you want to quit at that point? Okay, so obviously, last time we were setting up our HUD. So if you guys remember, we have this little UI container in our hierarchy, and it's got a script on it called the UI manager. And we've got some stuff on here for the game over settings specifically, which we'll talk about in a minute here. And then inside that, we have a canvas that holds our HUD. And, all of our HUD elements are in a little hierarchy inside here, right? Our lives, our text elements, etc. So we're going to do the same thing for our main menu and our background. We're going to create a separate canvas for each of our menu screens. And then when we hook them up in our UI script here, it will automatically show them when we want them to be shown, because obviously that scripting has already been done ahead of time. So just make sure that you have your art assets ready for this, right? I did import them in the previous video. So if I go into art assets, 2D assets, into the UI folder, I just have a main menu background here. And for the game over screen, it's just going to be a black screen. You can also have a separate image for the game over screen if you would like. And I talked about this a little bit previously, but it bears repeating in here. Your main menu background does not have to be an original piece of art. Maybe find a cool piece of art like this, and even inside Unity, you could use some of your pre-existing sprites to kind of create a little scene. Obviously, you can draw something if you want, But I would suggest just kind of putting something together using the assets that you have with some kind of new background texture. Just make sure it's not some kind of commercial thing that you're not allowed to use, right? And we're going to be adding the text in the button in Unity, obviously. So it needs to be clean. You don't want to have your title on there because we're going to be adding that as a text element. Okay, just like we did for the HUD. So as long as you have that sprite ready to go, we can start creating our main menu. We'll do that first, then we'll do the game over menu second because it's a little bit more complicated. Not much, but a little bit. So I'm going to go to my UI object here in my hierarchy. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down. Sorry, I need to move myself. Okay. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down to the UI pullout and I'm going to create a new canvas. And I'm going to name this canvas my main menu. And then we're going to add some elements to it, right? A canvas, again, I know I'm reiterating this, but if I shut off my HUD canvas, for example, my main menu canvas, there's nothing, right? There's no visuals to it yet because we haven't actually added anything. It's just a space that is going to draw on top of our game window. So we need to actually add sprites and stuff to it so that we can see those be drawn, right? We want to make sure we have our canvas set up correctly, and we're going to set it up the same way that we set up our HUD, right? So I am going to turn off my HUD for now, but you do need to remember, well, actually, I think, well, we'll see. We'll test it at the end. Just, you know, if your HUD's not working, maybe come back here and turn it back on, but we'll look at this again. But I want to use the same settings that we used here for the HUD, for my main menu, right? It's a little bit different. So we could have just duplicated the HUD, but I'm just doing this so we can go over these ideas again. So we have our main menu screen here, and you can see that some of my components have different settings here. So on my HUD, I have my canvas set to screen space overlay. I have my scaler set to scale with screen size. So let's take a look at the main menu. Well, screen space overlay, that's good. But I have my UI scale mode set to constant pixel size. So I'm going to change it to scale with screen size. And I'm actually going to make one correction from the previous video. We can just use 800 by 600 as our reference resolution, and it's probably a better idea because it means that our game will support a smaller resolution. So if you look back at the HUD, I actually gave it a widescreen resolution here, 1280 by 720. I'm just going to change that back to 800 by 600. Okay? Now I believe that everything else is the same, except that we're actually missing a component here. So all of these components are added automatically when you create a canvas, right? It adds the canvas scaler, and the graphics raycaster, and it uses a rect transform to determine the object's location. However, for the canvas specifically, those values are actually driven by this component here. That's why they're grayed out. So what element are we missing? We are missing this canvas group element. And the canvas group element allows us access to the alpha value of the canvas, right? So if I had my HUD on, you can see if I adjust this alpha value here, and that's what allows our menus to fade in and out. So I'm just going to copy this component. And you can do this with any component, right? You can copy it, and it will copy the current values of that component, right? Copy component, and then I can go over here to my main menu, click on any of the bars here, and just click paste component as new. Right? The other thing that you can do is say that you change these values, right? Let's say that I had an alpha value of 0.5 and I wanted to copy that over to my other menus. I could again copy the component, go over to my HUD, and paste the component values into the existing component on the HUD, right? Obviously, I don't actually want to do that. I want my alpha to be 1 on the canvas group on both of my UI. I just wanted to show you that you can easily copy components and or their values back and forth. Okay, so we got our canvas all set up. Let's add some actual UI elements here. Just going to turn off my HUD again so that it's out of the way. So first things first, let's add an image, and let's drag in our main menu background into that image. And we can see, just like we talked about last time, that this is very similar to the sprite renderer when we are creating our characters, right? We tell it what source image we want to use. It is a sprite image that it uses, and we have some we have some ways of controlling it here. So the first thing that we're going to do is, obviously it's become stretched and weird. I don't want that. I want to make sure that I maintain the aspect ratio, so I'm going to turn on preserve aspect ratio. And you can either, you don't need to do this, but using the set native size button will get you to its, native resolution compared to the canvas. And then from there, I'm going to use the rect tool to scale it down, but I'm not going to scale it down and try to fit it exactly to my canvas like that. And the reason being is because we might get, this kind of thing, right? Where we can actually see through if I don't get it perfect. And then in different resolutions, we might have the same problem. So I'm going to overscale it, about like that, just to try to make sure that no matter what resolution we're on, we're going to be relatively safe, that we're always going to be able to see this background in full. Okay? I'm going to rename that object to my menu BG. And then we're going to create some text. So let's right-click the main menu component here, go down to UI, and create a Text Mesh Pro component, just like we did before. Right? This is going to be for the title of my game. So you can put this stuff wherever you want. I'm going to put mine up near the top here. And importantly, remember we talked a lot about the idea of anchoring the UI elements to make sure that they stay where we want them to be. Right? I'm going to anchor my title to the top center so that when I resize my game window, see if it's in free aspect, for example, it will attempt to do its best to stick to that top area of the screen. Now, obviously, you can see exactly why I overscaled that background, right? If we were working in like a 1:1 aspect ratio, our game wouldn't work. We'd have to scale this even larger, right? Or we'd have to add a large black image in the background to just make sure that we could never see through the game like that. I'm going to set mine back to 16:9. Just something worth thinking about, right? You're always worried about resolution. It will try to scale things accordingly and use their anchored positions, but it's not always going to be perfect, like I've said before. And we could do that, right? We could go to my main menu background, or sorry, just to my main menu, and we could create a new image and call this background fill. Move this up behind my main menu background. I could just, well, here, hold on. Let's move it in front so you can see what's happening here. Right now it's just a white sprite and there's no image. But I don't actually need an image. And this is how we're going to do the Game Over menu as well. Right? I could just set the color to whatever I want. I want it to be black so that it looks like space if there's spillover. Right? And then I could just scale this to like a huge size that takes up the entire size of the, like there's no way that we could ever not see that, right? But I want to make sure that it's behind my menu background. And then if we were in free aspect and we had some very bizarre resolution, we would just see that black background. Right? So now we're, we'd have to be in some kind of insane resolution like this to ever have spillover. Okay? So, back to that text element. Let's rename it to my title, txt. Now, your naming conventions can be whatever you want. Usually what I do, actually, is I do something like this. txt underscore main title. And my menu background, I would call that img underscore menu background, so that I know that that's an image just by looking. And same thing for my background fill, img underscore bg fill. That's how I like to name my stuff. You don't have to be that extreme with your naming, but especially with UI elements, I like to be able to just come and see all this stuff, right? So I would do the same thing for my main menu. This would be a canvas underscore main menu, right? But naming stuff like that, totally up to you, whatever works for you. I just have names in my notes that I set things to try to make things easier, basically, but so that we can reference it later. But that's basically the only reason I've been using certain names, is so that I can say, okay, now go back to your menu background object. So I'm going to unname these. I'm just doing that as an example, obviously. Okay, so let's go to our title text, and just like we did last time, let's change the font, right? We created these font assets last time in the previous video. And I'm going to pick one that I want to use for my game title. I'm going to try this one here. And I'm going to call my game Space Wars or something like that. Right? I am going to auto size my font and increase the actual size of it so it takes up a larger area, right? Maybe not the whole screen because I want to account for different resolutions. It will auto size though. That's the whole point of auto sizing. And I'm going to make sure that it's justified to the center and justified to the center of vertically as well. I don't want it to overflow, so I don't want it to wrap, so I'm going to turn wrapping off and just allow it to overflow. Okay, and that looks good to me. I could also change the text color, right? This might be a good time to use this color gradient bool. If you tick that, you can see you get a different color for each of the four corners of each letter. So I could do something cool like, you know, you do blue in the top right and left hand corners or something like that, right? And I could get some kind of a cool gradient look like that. Maybe the center is like more like this electric blue color. Something like that. And also, I could try something like adding an outline right here down in my material options for my text asset. I could do, you know, I have outline here. I could increase the outline thickness. It doesn't really look good with this one actually because the text has a lot of kind of weird transparency to it. So maybe I could try, let's just see. If I change the color, does it look, I guess it looks okay actually. You know, maybe not white, but probably just go with black and maybe move it down a bit so I can see that. And there's other things you can do too, right? I can make it glow. I could give it lighting. I could give it an underlay, right? And you can expand all of these and adjust them to your liking. However you want your title to look, you kind of have some like similar to Photoshop blending options, right, that we used at the beginning of the semester. You have some very simple kind of versions of that here right in the Unity editor because of Text Mesh Pro. It's kind of cool. Anyway, let's move on. Let's create our button. So in my main menu again, I'm going to go down to the UI drop down. Sorry, I know you can't see it. And I'm going to select a button, Text Mesh Pro. And what that will give us is a button that has some text on it already set up, right? So we can change our font and stuff like that. Okay, so let's set up the visuals of our button first, and then I'll just talk a little bit about how it actually works. So I want, you know, like a nice large button to click. And I'm going to move my button down to the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to anchor it to the bottom of the screen like that. And I'm going to change the colors in the actual button component here. And here you can see our little Unity event that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is, in the case of the button, is called an on-click, right? When I click the button, what do I want to happen? And it allows me to set this stuff up right in Unity. So all of the interactable UI elements have this type of component where you can customize them. And in the case of a button, we want colors for, you know, what does the button look like normally? Well, I'm going to make it, you know, this electric blue color. And what does it look like when it's highlighted? Right? I could go for a lighter blue. What does it look like when I'm pressing it? Right? I could go for that, like a grayed out blue to look like the button is being pressed in. What does it look like when it's selected? Again, a lighter blue. And what does it look like when it's disabled? Right? I could set it to like a dark gray. So you can actually tell Unity whether this button is interactable or not, and you can see that when it's disabled, it adopts my color and the alpha. I didn't actually realize that the alpha was set to transparent, but that's kind of cool. right? So obviously it needs to be interactable in order for this to work. And it will change, right, if we play the game now. Oh, actually, we might have to do one thing. I forgot. Oh, no. Oh, yes, we do. We have the game running and our menu still active. You can see everything spawning in the side here. So in order to fix that, I'm just going to go to the game manager, and I'm going to set my game stage now to game stage init. And that's where we're going to leave it, basically, from now on, except maybe to just test the game over screen. Actually, I guess we don't even... Oh, yeah, the victory screen we would need to test, right. But this is the one that you want it on when you hand in your assignment. Okay, you want it on the initialization stage. And now, if we play the game... Here we go. We have our menu. Our game is not playing in the background. Our HUD is not showing up. And you can see that my button now reacts to those colors that I set up. So when it's highlighted, it turns that light blue. When I press it, it should turn that dark blue, right? But obviously, nothing's happening here. So we're going to talk about that next. But let's fix the text on our button as well. I guess I should also just mention, you don't have to just use color tint with a sprite. You can also swap to a different sprite. So if you have like different button sprites that you actually want to use for each of those states, you can if you want to like hand draw each of those types. And you can also use animations as well. You can set up an animator controller and use these names here to actually trigger different animation states for your button. So if you have like a 3D button or something, it doesn't even have to be 3D, but you know, you could make it squash and stretch when, you know, it's highlighted or clicked or whatever. So there are different things you can do here, but color tint is obviously the simplest one. And yes, okay, before we talk about the on click, let's just set up our text. So again, I'm going to pick a font that I want to use for this button. I think this is the font that I want to use. It's just very small, so I'll just make sure to auto size it, and I'm going to increase the max size to like 200 or something. Yeah, that's the font I want to use. I'm going to change the color to white probably. Yeah, that looks good. I am going to make sure it does not wrap, so wrapping is disabled. It's justified to the center already. That's good. Okay, yeah, everything looks good. Obviously, I'm just going to have this be my start button. Now, you may notice that in the case of this button, right, my text is a little weird. For some reason, I have it justified to the center, but it's not really in the center of the button, is it? So that's what's nice about how Unity creates the button as two separate pieces here, because I can just adjust the size of my text box to make sure that it's in the center of the button. Right? And beyond that, I could grab these little squares here, and I could actually adjust where the text sits inside the text element. So the text element's size and where the text is actually allowed to exist within that element can also be adjusted just on that singular object there, right? Whoops. So you have many tools to make sure that your text is aligned properly. And that's probably the better way of doing it. Instead of adjusting the actual size of the text element on the button here, I think it would actually be better to grab the white square and adjust the text bounds, or whatever you want to call that itself, to get it in the center there. Okay, that's what it's going to look like in the game. Cool. Maybe it's a little bit big. I can resize the whole thing. Make sure if you're trying to resize your button, you're not just resizing the text, right? Those are two separate objects. I can maybe make it just a little bit smaller. Something like that. It just looks too wide to me. And, you know, in a real game, you would want to have exit button and options buttons and stuff, but we're not going any further with it here. So I'm going to rename this to my start button. And I'll rename this, just in case I'm sorting or searching in the hierarchy, to my start button text. Okay? So, final piece of the puzzle here is setting up this on-click event. So like I said, basically what happens here is in Unity's buttons component script, which is right here, what they've done is they've written a function called onClick, and it detects via a raycast whether the player is clicking on the button. And when their script detects that the player has clicked within the bounds of that button via raycast probably. They run this event that they've created called onClick. And it's a public Unity event, and you can create these yourself in your script, and they will show up in the inspector just like this. So it allows us to add listeners from Unity onto this button, or onto any element that you add a Unity event to. It's actually really cool, and we'll definitely talk about it in another course. It's something super useful when you're working with designers, right? You can literally create an event and you know exactly when that event is going to happen, all in code, right? And then you just say, hey, make that a public Unity event so that a designer can hook up whatever they want to it. Oh, they want to play a sound effect there, they want to fade in an image there, whatever, right? It could be anything. And you can create functions in other scripts and hook them up to this event as event listeners, right? So it's not just Unity built-in things, but we could do things like this, for example. So I'm going to add a new listener to this onClick event, right? I'm going to click the plus button, and you can see it gives me some options here. Do I want this to run in runtime only or when I'm working in the editor? I don't want that for things like a button, but you can actually set up debug buttons this way. If you want, that will run when your game's not even in play mode. I'm going to leave mine, obviously, on runtime only, because I don't want to be trying to start the game without Unity in play mode, because it would just run a bunch of errors. And what does it give us here? It gives us a slot for a Unity object, which is going to be one of our scripts, right? And it gives us a drop down to select a function, but we can't select anything because we don't have a Unity object in here. So the way that this works is I have my UI script here, right? And on this UI script, if we take a look at the actual script, there will be some public functions that we can assign as listeners of that onClick event. So let's just take a look at that very quickly here. So I have my little UI manager script here, and basically I'm just going to be looking for public functions that are going to be available to me in the Unity editor. So far, all I see is private. Here they are. Public handle game start. It tells the game manager to start the game, etc. Right? It does some other things in code, calls out to other classes here and tells them to do things. And then we have show menu on start. Oh, sorry, that's a private one. So public handle game start is one that we could potentially use. Public show game over. We're definitely going to use that. Also, there's a weird typo here. Capital V for some reason. Handle user interface for the end of the game. So we're obviously going to use that for a game over screen. Public void restart game. So we're probably going to hook that up to our button to restart the game on the game over screen, right? Public void quit game. So all of these public functions here, as long as they only have one parameter, that is one caveat to this system, is that whatever public functions you create can only have one parameter, because Unity, the Unity event itself can only handle one parameter. And you'll see what I mean when we use this show game over one. But any of these public functions, I could call them from any other script, right? But I could also add them as listeners to any other event in Unity. So we're going to do that by adding them as listeners to our onClick event. All right, so we go back to our start button, we got our onClick event, and I'm just going to drag my UI object that has that script on it into the slot here. And then you can see that my little drop down here lights up, right? Because it's looking at that object, and what it does is it says, okay, what are all the things that I could potentially do for that object, including any components it has attached to it. So if I had multiple scripts attached to it, we would see multiple selections here for other scripts. Right now we just see the UI manager, but you can see there's other things I can do on a base level in Unity, like things affect the game object, like for example set the object inactive. If I wanted to click that button and turn off that object, I could set that up via a Unity event listener, right? Also, I can change things about the transform here, but I want to run one of those public functions from my UI manager class, and you can see that they should show up as long as they only have one parameter. Like I said, they will show up in this list, right? So we have handle game start, and that's the one that we want to use for this button. So I'll just set that, and now when we click that button, it will run this function right here and tell the game manager to get rid of the main menu and start the game. So that's how you can set up, and obviously we'll talk about this more later. You know, on a user end, it's very simple, and that's the whole point of it, right? You can work with a designer, set a bunch of things up for them, and they can just hook stuff up in Unity however they want things to function, right? Without having to ever look at a script. So it is a nice tool, and we'll talk about it more because obviously there's more nuance to it. You know, how do you create the event in the first place, etc. I didn't really show you that, but we'll talk about that in another class. So we should test our game now, but I'm pretty sure now that we've set that up, it should work. So I should be able to click Start Game. And it kind of worked, but I know why it's not working. Okay, so we have the UI object here, and we can see that it has a reference to our main menu canvas, so we need to just drag that in. And it makes sense, right? Because, you know, what are we doing right now? When we click the button, we're running an event from this script. We're running a function from this script, so obviously it's going to need a reference to our main menu so that it can fade it in and out, right? So you can set up all that stuff in code and then have it easily accessible to a designer. It's pretty slick. So now that that's hooked up, we should be able to press the start button and the game should actually start. There we go. Cool. Okay, so that's our main menu. And I know that I went a little long-winded on that one, but game over menu, we're going to set up the same thing. We're going to have 2 buttons and some text. So I won't go as into detail on that one. So UI, right-click, go down to the very end where the UI menu is. Again, I can move myself, I guess. I'm going to click my UI container, go all the way down to UI, create a new canvas, and I'm going to call this my game over. We'll just call it game over. Again, I want to change some things over here in my canvas. I want to set it to scale with screen size, and I want to add that canvas group component to make sure that we can access the alpha value of the canvas. And before I forget, now that I've created that canvas, I'm going to go back to my UI script and I'm going to drag in my game over menu into the appropriate slot here. And we can see that there's other settings here. So I'm going to have to drag in, it looks like I'm going to need 3 text components. One is going to be my results text, one is going to be my final score text, and one is going to be my play again text. And then we can see here that you guys can actually set the messages to whatever you want here. Whatever you write in these boxes will be shown on your text elements in-game when you get the game over screen. So we have a victory message, a fail message, a final score message, and a play again message. Okay? So let's set those 3 text components up and then create a couple buttons. So game over canvas. Again, I'm going to go down to UI. I'm going to create text object, and this will be my victory text. Oh, also, sorry, we obviously need a background for our game over screen as well. So let's do the same thing we did for the main menu. Right-click, UI, image. I'm going to set the image to black, and I'm just going to scale it up so it covers the whole screen. And make sure that that is at the back here behind the game over, or behind any text that we're adding. And I'm going to call that my game over BG. I'm also going to shut my main menu off for now so that I can't see it behind my well, actually, I guess I should use that as an opportunity to talk about the sort order of the canvases. So it's kind of weird, right? We have our game over background, but I can see the main menu over top of it. And I talked to you guys before about how, when we were making the HUD, about how the order of the objects matters inside the canvas, right? So they'll all draw on top of each other based on the order they appear in the hierarchy. But that is not true between canvases, right? We have 3 different canvases here. So even though game over comes after main menu in the hierarchy, it may not actually show over top of main menu. And we probably want it to. So on our actual canvas components here, we have a sort order, and it works just like your sprite sort order or whatever. So I can say, well, my HUD can be at 0, because I always want my main menu and my game over menu to appear over top of my HUD. And then my main menu could sort at position 1. And then my game over menu could sort at position 2. And now that's fixed the issue. Now I can have my main menu active, but still see my game over screen over top of it because it has a higher sort order. Okay, that's all there is to it. It's just a little confusing because inside of a canvas, how things draw is based on the order in the hierarchy and the parent-child relationship. But when you're talking about 3 different canvases in relation to each other, that's not true. Okay, so we got our game over background. We have our victory text. Let's, again, set my text options here. So let's just say victory text, and we'll let the game change this for us, obviously. Let's scale it. Move it to the top of the screen. Anchor it to the top of the screen. Okay. Auto size the text. Text color white is good. Let's pick a font that I want to use. Let's use this one now. I didn't use this one for anything else. And let's center the text. And that'll be our victory text. That's all I need to add to it. We're just going to need to drag in the reference into that UI script. So I can just duplicate that, right? We look back at that UI script. What do I need? I need results text, final score text, and play again text. So I guess this isn't victory text. This is results, because it could be victory or fail text. Okay, so what were the other ones we needed? We got results text, we need final score, and play again. Okay, so let's just duplicate that, Control D, and move it down. And duplicate it one more time, Control D, move that one down to the center of the screen. And obviously, I should probably anchor that one to the center of the screen. This one in the middle here, there's not really an ideal place for it to be located. I could child it to this top results text. I could do that with both of them, actually, and that might get me the best outcome. Let's take a look at the game window and just see how they move around when I change the resolution. All right, so if I go to free aspect, let's just see what things look like. See how they're separating kind of strangely like that? So let's try, instead of anchoring, we'll anchor our top text to the top center of the screen, and then we'll just child our other 2 texts to each other and make sure that they are anchored to the center of their parent object. Right, so they both need to be anchored to center. The top level object is going to be anchored to the top of the screen. And let's go back to 16:9 now because I've kind of screwed it up, and make sure that our results text is, in the right spot, which I kind of wanted it. It was kind of in the center of the screen, wasn't it? Just make sure they're, in a good spot in relation to that top one. They all look like they're kind of evenly split. That looks pretty good. So now let's set it on free aspect and see how that behaves, right? So now they are all, anchored to each other, so we won't get that weird splitting up. We'll maintain the space in between them. And it's all based on that top level object being anchored to the top of the screen, so it's trying to stick to the top of the screen. The other objects are anchored to that top level object, and then the third one is anchored to the one that's anchored to the top level object, right? So it gets a little confusing, but that's usually the best way if you're sorting a list like that. There is another way you can do it that we'll talk about in another class. There are layout groups that you can add to UI elements, but I don't want to get into it now because it's a little too complicated to bother talking about. So we got our 3 texts. First one is results. What do we say in the UI? Final score and play again text. So the second one will be final score, and I will copy that and actually paste it into the text field so I know what that is when I'm just looking at the game when it's not running. And then, God, my memory's bad, play again text. So play again, and again I will copy that and paste it so that I can see what it is. And this one I might as well fix it, results text. Doesn't matter because the script is going to change what it says immediately anyway, but that's fine. Okay, so we got our 3 texts there. And we could drag those in. So let's go up to our UI object and drag in our references. So to our results text, to our final score text, and to our play again text. And again, whatever you write in these boxes here will be responsible for actually displaying that. And our game over screen should work like this now, right? It should update and say what we want it to say. So if I go to my game manager, or sorry, my main player, and give him like 2 lives instead of 4, so we can just quickly test this. All right, so I got my main menu, start the game. You can see that the script is turning these things on and off when necessary. So you don't actually need to worry about whether they're turned on or off when you save the scene, I don't think. And there's our game over screen, right? So sorry you lost, your final score is 0. Would you like to play again? But we have no buttons to interact with, obviously, so that's the last thing. We're going to add 2 buttons, one to quit the game, one to restart the game. And we'll hook them up, hook up functions to those on-click events for those buttons. Okay? So let's copy our button from our main menu. So I'm going to go to my main menu, and I'm just going to copy the start button, the whole thing. And I'm going to go to my game over menu, and I'm going to paste the start button. Now, make sure it's actually inside the game over menu, or it won't show up. You can see that I did indeed click my game over menu and clicked paste, but for some reason it actually pasted it outside of the canvas. Not really sure why. All right, so just make sure you drag it in there so that they're actually inside the canvas. And of course, we're going to have one button over here and one button over here-ish. And the button on the left-hand side, I'm going to anchor to the bottom left corner. And the button on the right-hand side, I'm going to anchor to the bottom right corner. Right? Or you could anchor them to the center. Up to you. I'm going to anchor them to the corners for mine. And one of them is going to be my play again button. And the other one is going to be my quit button. Right now, they would both just start the game. Except it probably wouldn't work because they're on the game over screen. So the game isn't in the correct... is not in the correct stage to actually get that to work. But so probably want to change the button text names as well. So play again text, or button text, and quit button text, or something like that, just so that you know what they are if you need to search for them in the hierarchy or whatever. And the buttons themselves, they're already set up the way that I want. I want the text to be different, so this one will be play. Oh wait, it's going to ask us, do you want to play again? So it's going to say yes on the first button, the exclamation mark maybe, and the second button text is going to say no. Right? So our actual buttons, all we need to do, they're already set up and ready to go with the highlighting and everything. All I need to do is select a different function, right? They even already have my UI object in here. So if they don't for some reason, remember, the script that we're trying to run a function from is on the UI object. So just drag that into the UI manager here, or into the on-click events object field here. And then select the function you're looking for. So UI manager, let's see, what do we got in here? We have restart game. That's what I want probably, because we're on the play again button. And we have quit game. That's what I want for the other button probably. So let's restart the game on the play again button, and let's quit the game on the quit button. Okay, that's all there is to it. Everything else should be good to go. Now, if you wanted to do a sprite image or something for your game over screen, that's totally fine. I'm just doing mine black to save time. I could reuse my menu image probably, right? I could go to my main menu, copy my menu background, and then paste that into my game over screen. If you want that, totally fine. Maybe I'll leave that actually. It looks pretty good. And like I said, The script, the UI script, does handle turning these things on and off. But just keep in mind, right, it might be hard to work on the game with them turned on, so I'm pretty sure that you can have them all shut off at the beginning, and it will turn on what you need to be turned on, or whatever. So let's try playing the game. Right, game manager needs to be set to stage init. Save the scene. Main player needs to have as many lives as you want him to have. I'm going to keep mine on 2. And here we go. Space Wars. Start. The music fades in, the HUD fades in. There's my 2 lives. Oh, I lost one already. Let's see if I can get a little score just to make sure that's working before I actually die for the final time here. Oh, there we go. And there's my game over screen. Sorry you lost. Your final score is 51. Would you like to play again? Let's try yes. It should reset the game. Okay, there we go. Score reset, timer reset. And this time, we will click no, and that should exit the game. Last thing we should test, go to the game manager, set it to the boss stage, and just make sure that the victory message works correctly. I don't know why it wouldn't, but might as well test it, right? And there we go. Congratulations, you won. Your final score is 130. Would you like to play again? Yes. Should restart the game from the beginning, I believe. Yes. Okay, so even though we were on the boss stage here, it still started it from the beginning. But make sure when you hand your assignment in that this is set to stage init. Okay? And that's it, guys. We got our game fully functional here with all of our menus and everything else. Right? So, like I said, I am going to do one very short video after this just to show you how to make a build of the game so that you can play it from an exe instead of having to open the project. But just keep in mind, when you hand in your assignment, you do need to hand in a build, but also I need your Unity project files as well, not just a build, okay? Just like every other time, except with a build this time. And you can make whatever little changes you'd like to your game. Obviously, you know, if you have some extra time or whatever at the end here. But as long as it's working and has all of these elements, you know, working correctly that we've added in the last couple of videos here, you're good to go. You can hand it in. Okay, guys. So I'll see you in that final video for making a build. Yeah, talk to you soon.